What if the very thing you thought made you kind is the silent architect of your deepest humiliation? What if your endless availability, your eager yes, your constant presence, was not compassion, but a quiet surrender of your own dignity? Consider this. When was the last time your absence was felt more powerfully than your presence? When was the last time you vanished? Not to escape, but to echo. We're told that to be loved, we must be open. But Schopenhauer warned us, the more we dissolve into others, the more we abandon the only fortress that can protect us, the self. They call it generosity. But is it truly kindness, or a disguised hunger for validation dressed in virtue's clothing? The world praises the one who is always there, always willing, always reachable, yet secretly it respects the one who withdraws. It fears the one who does not explain, and it longs for the one who refuses to be possessed. In a society that worships visibility, the truly powerful become shadows. They are remembered not for what they gave freely, but for what they withheld, elegantly, deliberately. The more available you are, the more disposable you become. But who dares to admit this aloud? You think you're being respected. You're not. You're being consumed. Mankind, Schopenhauer observed, is a predator of attention, and your constant yes is the scent of blood in the water. They smile, they thank you, but beneath that civility is a calculation. If you are always near, you are no longer needed. If you are always seen, you become invisible. Have you ever felt it? That strange numbness after overgiving, that subtle nausea after answering one more message, showing up one more time, offering just one more piece of yourself you didn't have to spare. That isn't fatigue, it's existential erosion. You were not born to be accessible. You were born to be unfathomable. A question, not an answer. But somewhere along the way, your silence was mistaken for rudeness, your boundaries for ego, your mystery for rejection. And so you broke yourself into fragments of availability, hoping someone would piece you back together. But they never do. They only take what's easy to reach. What if I told you that respect is not given to those who serve endlessly, but to those who vanish purposefully, who create a presence through their absence, a force through their refusal? And now, here you are, caught in the paradox. The more you show up, the less you matter. The more you offer, the less they see. But somewhere in the shadows, hidden beneath the noise, is the truth your soul has always whispered. Stop proving. Start retreating. There is a psychology of respect buried deep beneath your habits of availability, a darker, more ancient law, one that begins not with speaking louder, but with disappearing at the exact moment they expect you to stay. And if that sentence stung, you're closer to the revelation than you realize, but only if you continue, only if you dare to walk into the silence. What begins as kindness often ends in quiet self-betrayal. You never meant to disappear in their expectations. It just happened. One small yes at a time, a favor here, an extra gesture there. You offered, they took, again and again. Not out of malice, but because you allowed it. And now you sit in the soft echo of your own erasure, wondering why they no longer look at you the way they once did. Why their messages have cooled. Why the room no longer stirs when you enter. What they once praised, they now ignore. What they once admired, they now expect. This is not fatigue. It is the slow death of being overly accessible. But no one tells you this, because to admit it is to threaten the very game they depend on, a world that feeds off the endlessly available. There is a tragedy hidden inside the virtue of the agreeable. Schopenhauer saw it in the eyes of those who confused love with sacrifice, who believed that to be worthy, one must be willing to vanish. But the more you give without demand, the more you teach others that your presence is a currency of no value. You become a permanent fixture, not a person, but a utility, and you begin to feel it, a quiet resentment growing beneath the surface. The smiles no longer feel real. The praise starts to sound hollow. You are not angry with them. You are furious with yourself. for diluting your presence until nothing of substance remains, and still you keep giving. Why? Because some part of you still believes that enough kindness will finally earn you the one thing you've never truly received: respect. But respect is not born from generosity. It is born from tension, from absence, from the unspoken. The more you speak, the less you are heard. The more you appear, the less you are felt. And somewhere you've sensed this, a strange power in your silence, a magnetism in your distance. When you pull away, the world begins to lean in. They ask where you went, they remember your weight, and yet each time you return too soon, you rob yourself of that very presence. You become noise again. Background, forgotten. Why does this cycle repeat? Because you were taught to fear rejection more than you crave truth. Because the wound of being unwanted runs so deep, you'd rather dissolve yourself than risk not being seen. But disappearing strategically is not the same as being abandoned. One is weakness, the other is wisdom. You are not here to be a servant of their comfort. You are here to embody the storm and the silence that follows. There is a kind of power that speaks louder through absence than 1,000 proclamations. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "When you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you." When you retreat, not in shame, but in self-possession, the world begins to adjust its shape around you. They are not used to that kind of presence. They are used to performers, pleasers, the eternally available. But you become an enigma. And in that mystery, something ancient awakens. Awe. It is not admiration, it is not even love. It is fear disguised as reverence, and it only arises when you dare to stop giving yourself away. So why do you still hesitate? Why does the idea of silence terrify you more than humiliation? Because you've confused being wanted with being needed. You've mistaken attention for connection. But the truth is far more cruel and far more liberating. The ones who always come when called are never truly awaited. The ones who vanish without explanation become myths, and myths are never forgotten. The question now is not whether they will miss you. It is whether you are finally ready to become the absence they cannot ignore. Are you ready to step into the shadow where respect is born, where noise ends and gravity begins? You've built your life around presence, being seen, being responsive, being the one who shows up. But what if your presence was never the point? What if it was your disappearance that held the real power all along? The paradox is almost cruel in its elegance. You vanish and they see you more clearly. You withdraw and they feel you more deeply. The world, in its infinite distraction, only values what it cannot hold. This is not a flaw, it is the architecture of human desire. The fruit within reach is never as sweet as the one just beyond the branch. And you, in all your availability, have become the fruit they no longer taste. This is not about playing games, it is about reclaiming space, relearning weight, unlearning your own disappearance. Even now, part of you resists this. A whisper says, but what if they leave for good? Good, let them. The ones who vanish when you reclaim your worth were never drawn to you, only to your utility. And in their leaving, they free the space for something deeper, quieter, more real to emerge. This is the truth no one dares to speak. That absence is not emptiness, it is sacred ground. And only those with the courage to stand in it will ever taste what it means to be truly respected. You have given too much for too long, not out of strength, but fear. But now you begin to take back the parts of you they forgot to value. Not by raising your voice, but by stepping back and watching the silence work on your behalf. You are not fading, you are becoming. And they will feel it. whether they want to or not. You are no longer obligated to explain your retreat. Not every absence needs justification. Some silences are surgical, necessary. Some disappearances are declarations, not of weakness, but of rebirth. The world does not need more people willing to be everything to everyone. It needs individuals who dare to be something to themselves. So step out of the light they placed you in. Let their questions multiply. Let your silence thicken. They will not understand at first. That is the point. Let them struggle with your absence. Let them wrestle with your void. Because in that tension, something sacred is born. A reverence forged not by effort, but by restraint. And you become not a person to be reached, but a presence to be remembered. There is a violence in always being available that no one dares to name. It is the quiet dismemberment of the soul, one unanswered need at a time. You convince yourself that showing up is strength, that being dependable will eventually anchor you in someone's heart. But hearts don't work that way. They do not reward what is always there. They crave contrast, tension, mystery. The flower that blooms every day is never noticed after the third. So you keep blooming, and they keep walking past. Not because they are cruel, but because you trained them not to look. You became the wallpaper of their world, familiar, unexamined, forgotten. And now you wonder why you feel so hollow. But what else could you become when you offered your presence like a commodity instead of a gift? The world tells you that selflessness is virtue, but that's a half-truth twisted into a cage. They never tell you that when you erase your needs, your presence becomes a whisper, that when you extinguish your edges for the sake of harmony, people forget how to touch you without crossing a line. Schopenhauer understood this cruelty well, that society thrives on the illusion of mutual need while secretly rewarding the one who pulls away first, the one who can leave without flinching, the one who watches attachment grow only to let it starve. And here you are, bleeding quietly in the name of connection, hoping they will see your sacrifice as proof of love. But love, real love, does not feed on sacrifice. It recognizes boundaries. It respects silence. And it cannot grow in the soil of desperation. Every time you respond immediately, every time you show up before they even ask, you are reinforcing a lie that your time, your energy, your soul are endlessly available. But you are not infinite. You are not a machine. You are a storm barely held together by memory and skin, and you are burning yourself alive just to keep them warm. Why do you think the fire has started to die in your eyes? It's not age. It's not fatigue. It's the erosion of self, the slow death of one who has never allowed themselves the luxury of being missed. Imagine what it would feel like to be longed for, to be searched for, to be an absence that echoes rather than a presence that drowns in overexposure. You owe yourself that chance. You owe yourself that space. There is a strange paradox buried inside power. The more you disappear on purpose, the more they begin to orbit you. Not because you are cruel, but because absence reawakens the hunger they forgot they had. Your silence forces them to listen. Your distance teaches them to notice. The very people who once took your presence for granted will begin to measure your absence like time, counting moments, tracing your outline in conversations, wondering what shifted. This is not manipulation. This is memory at work. They are remembering who you are now that you've stopped reminding them. And you are finally learning to taste your own gravity, not as a punishment, but as a return. So now you face the choice. Continue the performance of presence or dare to vanish with intention. Let them feel the weight of your silence. Let them sit in the space where you used to overflow. There in the hollow you leave behind, something sacred begins to bloom, not just for them, but for you. Because finally, you are no longer proving your worth by how quickly you answer, how constantly you appear, or how deeply you bend. You are becoming the unanswered question, the echo in their mind, the shadow they chase. And in that shadow, for the first time, they see you. Not all prisons have walls. Some are built with expectations, invisible, polite, and utterly lethal. You may think you're free because no one commands you, but look closer. Every unread message itches under your skin. Every unanswered call leaves a trace of guilt. You are not owned by chains, but by availability. 1,000 little moments when you abandoned your center to orbit someone else, and yet no one applauded, no one noticed, because when you are always there, you become a background hum, not a song. The tragedy is not that they don't see your effort. It's that you trained them to forget it exists. In trying to earn love through presence, you become the most forgettable thing of all, predictable. The human mind was never wired for constancy. What is abundant fades into white noise. What is rare becomes sacred. Robert Cialdini named it the law of scarcity, but Jung would have gone deeper, seeing in this principle not just economics of attention, but a spiritual truth. The soul craves what dances just beyond reach. It is the tension, not the possession, that animates desire. And yet you hand yourself over whole, unwrapped, unquestioned. No mystery, no rhythm, just endless availability in a world that thrives on contrast. You think this generosity is kindness, but Schopenhauer would warn you, the endlessly kind are often endlessly used. And the moment you need something in return, silence becomes your only answer. There is a biochemical consequence to this pattern, one Gabor Mate explores with surgical clarity. The addict is not always chasing a substance. Sometimes the high is approval, the drug is being needed, and the withdrawal, it's being ignored. You are not answering because you care. You are answering because silence terrifies you, because the space between messages feels like abandonment, and you've confused responsiveness with relevance. This is not connection, it's dependency. And the more you respond out of fear, the less they respect you. They sense it, we all do. That frantic energy, that unspoken desperation. Respect is not born from generosity. It is born from restraint. It is carved in silence, tempered in delay. There is a metaphor in Stoicism of the man who gives so much of himself that he forgets the coordinates of his own center. He becomes an echo in his own life. You've met him. Perhaps you are him. Always there, always ready, always saying yes. And yet, no one ever truly listens when he speaks, because his words, like his presence, are over-familiar. The cost of being perpetually accessible is not just exhaustion, it is erasure, a slow vanishing of identity beneath the weight of accommodation. You lose the edges that made you visible, the contours that made you real. You are still in the room, but no one feels you anymore, because you no longer feel yourself. But what happens when you stop? When you let the message wait? When you allow your presence to retreat like a tide? At first, there is panic, inside you, inside them. But soon something shifts. The space where you once stood begins to speak. Your absence becomes a presence louder than any word you ever uttered. The silence stings, the delay disturbs, and that disturbance is your return. You are no longer giving yourself away in fragments. You are becoming whole again, not by saying more, but by speaking less. Not by doing more, but by withdrawing with dignity. And in that quiet reclamation you become something new, not just seen, but respected. Absence, when intentional, is not a void. It is a weapon, a scalpel that cuts through illusion. Nietzsche once said, "Fewer words, more deeds." But in a world drowned in noise, even silence becomes a deed. You imagine that your constant messages prove your value, but value is never announced. It is felt in the absence. When you are always available, your presence becomes a soundless default. But when you vanish, deliberately, without resentment, something strange happens. The world listens. Not because you raised your voice, but because you lowered your presence. And in that space, your essence echoes louder than any explanation ever could. We forget this. What is too close becomes invisible. The sun, when stared at directly, blinds. The same law applies to people. When you offer yourself too freely, you rob others of the sacred act of reaching. There is a psychology of space, a magnetic pull created by the distance between two souls. Barg's experiments with hot and cold stimuli show how our minds project warmth or distance onto even the smallest interactions. You are not just a name on a screen, you are an emotional temperature. When you are too accessible, your warmth becomes taken for granted. But when you pull back, even slightly, your silence becomes a mirror in which others are forced to see themselves. What you do not say, what you do not give, what you consciously withhold, these shape perception far more than your efforts to be kind, present, or reliable. The mind craves contrast. In a sea of instant replies and urgent validations, the one who pauses commands attention. The one who is not always there becomes a mystery, and mystery is the seed of respect. This is not manipulation, it is a psychological truth. The cognitive dissonance of not having you forces others to assign value to you. The moment you reclaim your time, your energy, your boundaries, you stop being a function. You become a force. There is a spiritual clarity born in silence, when you do not rush to respond, when you sit in the discomfort of space, you begin to hear your own inner voice again. And what that voice tells you is devastating at first, that much of what you gave was not love, but fear. That much of your availability was a bribe for belonging, that your kindness was often an escape from conflict, not an act of courage. Jung warned us, the parts of ourselves we ignore become shadows that rule us from behind the curtain. And the shadow of the ever-available person is resentment. It builds unnoticed, until one day it speaks, not in words, but in collapse. But this collapse is sacred, because in it you remember what it feels like to be alone without being lonely, to disappear without feeling erased. You step out of the current, and for a moment everything goes quiet. In that stillness, you begin to see absence is not the opposite of presence. It is its amplifier. You are no longer trying to be seen. You are becoming someone who cannot be ignored. You are no longer proving. You are becoming. And the space you leave behind, the unanswered message, the moment of pause, the breath between appearances, becomes your signature. A reminder that you are not here to be consumed, but to be encountered. On your own terms, in your own time. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet act of not answering, the silent choice to stay still while the world screams for your reaction. True resilience is not forged in constant performance, but in the courage to disappear, deliberately, gracefully, without apology. You were taught to be strong by never breaking, to show up even when you're unraveling inside. But what if the deepest form of strength is the surrender? The pause, the moment you stop pretending that you can carry the weight of others while your own spine is cracking beneath invisible burdens. Most people confuse availability with reliability, and reliability with love. But love without boundaries is not love. It is self-obliteration. You cannot save others by losing yourself. You cannot be respected if your soul is rented out to the highest bidder of urgency. There is a kind of quiet violence in the way people take and take, assuming you will always be there. And there is a deeper violence in how you allow it, calling it kindness, calling it duty, while your inner voice is silenced by guilt. The pain you feel when you pull back is not abandonment, it is withdrawal from a drug called approval. There is wisdom in the way bamboo bends. It does not resist the storm, it yields, and in that yielding, it survives. The world breaks those who refuse to bend, but it also forgets those who never assert their right to exist outside of service. Your absence, when chosen with consciousness, becomes a declaration. I am not your emotional crutch. I am not your escape from silence. I am not here to make you feel whole while I fall apart. You are not rejecting others. You are reclaiming the fractured pieces of yourself scattered across conversations you no longer remember, favors you never meant to give, obligations that felt like open wounds. This is not about vanishing in bitterness. It is about retreating with intention, disappearing not to punish, but to heal. When you pull away from the world, even temporarily, something ancient awakens inside you, a voice you forgot you had. It does not speak in panic. It whispers in clarity. It tells you who you were before you became everyone's lifeline. It reminds you that your value is not in your availability, but in your essence. Not in how quickly you reply, but in the depth of your silence. You are not here to be useful. You are here to be whole. You were never meant to be strong all the time. You were meant to be real. Realness bleeds. It bends. It retreats. And then it returns. Not broken, but reshaped. The world will not fall apart because you stopped being its safety net. In fact, it might finally learn how to stand on its own. And you, in the shadows of your withdrawal, in the silence of your boundaries, you will find a strength far greater than anything you ever displayed in your overextension. You will find yourself, not the mask, not the role, but the core. And from that place, you will no longer beg to be respected. You will simply be, and they will feel it, whether you speak or not. What if your silence was never absence, but presence in its most potent form? Not a retreat, but a return, not from others, but to yourself. In every moment you withheld, in every breath you reclaimed, something ancient stirred beneath the surface. A memory not of events, but of essence, of a time before you were conditioned to equate availability with worth, presence with performance. The world mistook your stillness for weakness, but in truth, it was a power too deep to be explained, only felt. Perhaps now something inside you has shifted, not violently but irrevocably. You begin to see that respect was never about volume or visibility. It was about gravity. And gravity does not chase, it draws. You were never meant to orbit around need. You were meant to become a center of weight, a force of nature that others feel without understanding, that they follow without knowing why. Let them wonder. Let them feel your absence like a question they cannot answer. That is the mark of a soul no longer willing to beg for belonging. Because every time you said yes when you meant no, a part of you dissolved. And every time you vanished with intention, a piece of you returned. This is not selfishness. This is soul repair. There is no virtue in being consumed by a world that refuses to nourish you. What they called detachment was your resurrection. What they called coldness was your healing. Let them misinterpret. Your truth does not need translation. It needs embodiment. Live it, even if no one applauds, especially then. And now, as the noise settles and the silence expands, you may feel it, not as a thought, but as a vibration, a subtle shift in perception. You are no longer seeking permission to be whole. You are remembering that you always were, that even in your most fragmented moments, something unbreakable remained untouched. It speaks now, not in declarations, but in presence. And if you listen closely, you will hear it say, "You are not here to fill others. You are here to stop leaking." So if something in you was stirred, if a quiet corner of your soul was reached, stay. Do not let this dissolve like another echo lost to time. Leave your reflection in the comments. Share this with the one who always gives too much. Subscribe, not just to the channel, but to yourself, to this inner revolution, to the silent authority you've spent a lifetime ignoring. Because this wasn't just a video, it was a mirror. And now that you've looked into it, what will you do with what you saw?